So we have to do a chief learning experience while you're there.
Okay.
For to be
I can't minimize it if I'm recording.
You'll have to pull your PowerPoint one time.
Yeah, I don't know what it'll be. And then Key West is a lot of walking.
All right. Now we know how to edit that out from last week, because we're learning as we go, aren't we? Ready? Okay. All right, welcome back, everybody. A little bit smaller group here. I'm not sure about Zoom. We'll figure that out later. But, I hope it's just a reflection of the nice weather and not that people weren't satisfied with the person. That would be an imposter-related thought that I just set outside my head already. So we're going to let that go. Welcome back for session 2 of 4 about the conversation about how to best break free from imposter syndrome. Just reminding everybody that this is following the visit from Dr. Valerie Young, who I actually have seen a couple times this week because one of the things I've committed to over time is just watching as many different things that are out there for people related to imposter syndrome. So as I was watching on YouTube videos and different things over the course of last week, I got to see several things that Valerie Young was part of. But just so honoring the fact that her work is what brought us into the conversation this time around. A different TED Talk that I watched by a woman named Lou Solomon, I liked how she talked about it. It's like almost like you snuck out on stage from the back of the stage where you don't, and now you're out there on stage where you don't belong, and you're constantly looking for the bouncer, because at any minute now the bouncer's going to come throw you off. And I was like, I appreciated that image. It resonated for me. And we spend so much time looking for the bouncer that we're not just breathing and taking care of our business. Another woman talked about a crisis of confidence, and I think that that's closer to how I feel like I would put the word intermittent. They're intermittent crises, is that a word, of confidence? Like they come and they go. I'm having a moment of a crisis of confidence as opposed to feeling that way kind of all the time. I'm hoping that we can start to see that there's some moments when we aren't caught up in that and coming from a deeper, wiser place perhaps. Really appreciated Lou Solomon talking about the 4 primary emotions that it involves: anxiety, perfectionism, self-doubt, and fear of failure. And Meredith talks about perfectionism like for real, like it's the real deal. So just like some people will say, more and more in our popular culture, people will say, I'm OCD. And clinically speaking, they are so not OCD. They're a little particular about things. They like things a certain way, and they're a little psychologically rigid. And when things aren't the way they want, they get a little bothered. That's really different than having OCD, where you have a persistent, obsessive and compulsive pattern that won't allow you to leave your home without checking your door 10,000 times, kind of thing. So her really summed it up like perfectionism, like 100% perfect 100% of the time is sort of the goal. And the more you have that, the more likely imposter syndrome stuff would present. And you can kind of see why it would, because that's not even attainable, like I said last week. So anxiety, perfectionism, self-doubt, and fear of failure kind of all working to combine around this imposter syndrome idea. This is I appreciated from a YouTube video about SciShow Psych, which I just didn't know existed, and now I do. But they really talked a lot about the cycle. And I like it because you want to see it as, I think I said last week, like it can be, I don't think I actually maybe did say this, so let me take a breath. I think of it as a soft addiction. I think of it as like a non-drug related addiction, but it's a process addiction because the mindset continues to cycle over and over and over. And so in the world of addiction, we talk about, doing the same thing over and over, but expecting a different result. And this imposter syndrome mindset is very much like that. And these folks describe that cycle a little bit. You become anxious, you get a task, you become anxious about the task. Let's say it's a test or something that you're needing to do. You spend way too much time on it. It's like anxiety-driven preparation. Or you do the opposite, and you procrastinate and then rush to finish it. In either case, you're putting yourself through the anxiety ringer. And then when the project's done, you feel relieved and accomplished for a brief moment. This is my language, like a burst, or you get a burst of relief. Whew. But it doesn't last long because then you get positive feedback. But one of the hallmark is not letting that feedback in, because in your mind the belief is you don't, the core belief that kind of perpetuates this is you don't deserve the success that you get. So when people compliment you, it doesn't really make any kind of impact. But what you actually do is get anxious about that, and now you're already having more anxiety, and then a new task presents itself, and then you have to kind of go back to one. And we just kind of keep routing through that kind of. I'm going to talk about these patterns of coping a little bit later, but they're all the ways in which we try to avoid the anxiety actually perpetuate it. If you think of it as imposter syndrome as an expression of anxiety and shame, it's shame-driven anxiety. That's what happens to give us this mindset. So it sort of goes like, does the mindset create the emotional state, or is the emotional state creating the mindset? I think that it happens both ways. We're wanting to like interrupt the emotional part of it. We also have to get to the pattern of behavior, but we're going to kind of go at that a different way. I do think it might be helpful for you to kind of get a sense of like how big of a deal is this for you. The vast majority of people that were involved last week indicated either by raising their hands in here or through the Zoom that this is something that you're experiencing for yourself. Again, that whole idea that like there's a range of how much this might be impacting you. So this imposter phenomenon scale, and if you since I didn't give the PowerPoint slide yet, if you don't want to try to write all that down, if you Google Plant's imposter phenomenon scale, you'll get to a 20-question questionnaire. I took it, and so it seems pretty user-friendly to use, and it might just sort of give you a sense of kind of where you're at in terms of like how prevalent is this for you. And also, as you're doing that, will also sort of help you continue to see the different markers for it as well. I said this last week, I said very many things last week, but really seeing that the two main structures that I've seen for how to start to break free of it, they start at the cognitive behavioral level. And one of the ways I might describe this is that, and I'm hoping you'll have to tell me if I'm on camera still, Lydia. Am I still on camera?
Yes, I'll adjust.
This is where I'll be trying to draw. So if you've got like behavioral therapists start working on behaviors, so we might want to interrupt the actual behaviors of flying under the radar or procrastination. Some people start there and they just try to get rid of the behaviors. The emotional part is back behind the behaviors, right? And then the cognitive, and so psychodynamic therapists will work on like working through the emotions and trying to process that and heal some of the emotions. Cognitive folks work on thoughts. And that's what both of these models sort of start to address the situation here. Challenging your limiting beliefs, and then number 2 on the left, and then over here on the right is that contextualize and reframe it. So a lot of therapy happens in this cognitive behavioral space, and some of the work that I do actually comes like how do we create our thoughts? What comes before thought? So we're going to spend a little time talking about how we create our own experience in the moment, and then so we're not going to be working at it up here. We're going to try to come at it more from down here. Working at this level, where I both worked as both a client and a counselor for many years, it's kind of based on the idea. Let's see, if I'm going to, in a minute, talk about how you create your moment-to-moment experience of reality. And one of the metaphors that I first learned about that was that we operate a lot like a movie projector. If you think of your body as like the projector, in order to make a movie, you got to be plugged into a power source, right? So without that, we don't operate. So we've got like a heart rate, and we have a pulse, we have respiration, we have mental activity. So right now, I'm connected to that power source. I hope to be connected to it for many, 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 many years. At some point, this body won't be, and that won't be measurable. But from birth to death, I'm connected to that power source. I'm plugged into the outlet, so to speak. Another thing that we need to create our own movie is that we need that light that's in the projector. And we talk about that as consciousness. I talk about it a lot as illumination or awareness. We have the human gift of illumination, and we illuminate whatever thought we're holding. And so in this metaphor, thought is the film strip. And I don't know if you guys can remember the big old movie projectors, but if the film broke or there wasn't a film, you would just get white light on the screen. You wouldn't actually have any images. And so thought is really what gives our personal movie its context. And so working on this level, which many folks still do, is kind of this idea that in order to have a different movie, we want you to have a different movie. Right now, you spend too much time creating an imposter movie. Like in the cinema of Lisa, there's a horror movie going on related to not feeling competent enough to have this conversation about imposter syndrome, for example. She jokes a little bit. But the idea in cognitive behavioral therapy is that you kind of come into the world with a film strip, and it's blank. And when you think about it, we're all story makers. We all have the ability to create and hold a story about ourselves and about the world over time. And you know, when I first came into the world, I didn't have as much of a concrete story, and then I started taking notes. It's called socialization. Things would happen, I would take a note to self. Oh, this would happen, note to self. You know, two older siblings, when we played the dictionary game and road trips, they always got that word first. I made up that they were smart, therefore I thought that was a continuum of either or, therefore if they're smart and I'm not, I'm what? Stupid, note to self, right? And so over time, I complicated my story in the way, in this metaphor, it would be like I started imprinting onto my film strip, and my film strip became sort of structured. Like these are just things that I believe. My core beliefs were imprinted on my film strip, which I kept running through the projector. Working at it on this level is kind of the idea that I have to edit my film strip. I have to find the faulty frames, and I have to take those out. And even more importantly, in positive psychology, sometimes they're like, and there's an appropriate thought to put in. So I'm supposed to take this one out and not believe it anymore and put this one in and make sure this one doesn't get in my projector anymore because that one's not helpful, but this one's more helpful. So I can effort and control my thinking, and I can edit my film strip. And I don't know if you've ever tried to make yourself believe something that you really don't believe. It's like how why affirmations sometimes don't work is that you're trying to take a pre-created thought and you're trying to input it into your film. Right? And so a lot of times we get into a big struggle related to anxiety when we know that there's a thought that's not helpful to us. We can actually put a lot of attention on that thought, trying to not have that thought. And you cannot get rid of the thought by giving your attention to the thought. Like the more attention you give a thought, the more it's going to be there. So I'm trying to save you about 10 years of my own journey with this because I'm nice that way. That's never going to work. So sometimes when people meet us and they've got some anxiety issues, they've been in different kinds of counseling and they've tried to do some things. I'm always checking for, were you working with a person that was trying to tell you to change your thinking? Right? And it is true that when your thoughts change, the rest of the experience changes. But what I'd like you to just kind of consider the possibility. I always tell people, don't believe a word I say, because what I know to be true for me does not help you. It's what you see for yourself. The way I think of this more is that we do come in, we grab a blank film strip on the way in, and we imprint some stuff, and we start to have a story, and we walk around believing those things, right? That's why implicit bias is true for all of us, because people tell us stuff, and it gets imprinted on our film strip, and we're, to the extent that we don't know that that's the only film strip, we don't know it's the right film strip, the normal film strip, it's just a film strip that has stuff written on it. Where I find it more helpful to change some of these really, you know, derailing thought habits, there's a variety that we could name, is really acknowledging that we're connected to the film studio. We do not just get one film strip. It could be true that we've been like operating with this film strip that has a lot of these imposter beliefs embedded in it, like if I ask for help, I'm stupid. There are people who the rule is that clear, that's embedded in their film strip. It's like, if I ask for help, I'm stupid. Well, actually, I don't believe that to be true anymore, right? I've had a new idea about that. That new idea now is creating a new film strip for me related to my own intelligence and my own competency. But if I was still trying to make myself not believe that at that thought level, I'd still be I just have picture me like all wrapped up in my film, right? And so I'm just trying to help you see that you're connected to gifts that can help you just release that film and actually start to create a new one. And so today, one of the things I want to do is help you start to see how that process starts to work. Anybody in the room has questions or you're checking for questions, I'm happy to take questions as we go through this today. And I know that for some people, you may have heard pieces of this before. For some people, this may be really new, a new way to think about it. I know it was for me. So the strategy that I'm going to be suggesting is a principle-based strategy that starts with the question, how do humans operate? How do you actually create your experience? And so today we're going to talk about the very first thing that has to happen is we have to start waking up the part of you that can notice what you're creating with your gifts. I'm going to try to talk to you about what gifts we all have and how we use those to create our personal movie moment to moment. When you don't understand the moment to moment process, you're more at risk to carry a movie you already made over time. But when you start to see the value of recognizing how thought works moment to moment, you start to get some freedom. So the first part is we have to wake up the part of you that can witness what you're up to, that can start to notice whether in this moment you're operating in a moment of being centered and grounded, or if you might have gotten swept up into an imposter thought and you're actively engaging in that movie right now. Also wanting you to remember some things about who you are, maybe even learn some things. So today we're really kind of just going to start to explore number 1, 2, and 3. The third one is really starting to understand how you operate moment to moment. And that's a lot to do in the time I have. So the other stages of, I'll put this same principle-based strategy slide back in next week's. We'll come back to number 4 to recognize how you process a moment of shame, because it really is a shame triggering. It really does involve the emotion of shame. And then we're going to talk about mindful self-compassion in terms of like when you know you're having a moment, an imposter moment is activated. Imposter moment activation. It's activated. You're having one. How do you know? Your body gets hot. Your thinking can get tunnel vision. I'm going to ask you next week to sort of help me in number 4, talk about how do you know when you're having it. And then number 5 is when you know you're having it, how do you help yourself differently than you have in the past? Because the things you've done in the past have maintained it or made it worse. And something different can make it dissipate better, which is really what mindful self-compassion is kind of going to be about. Does that make sense? You with me still? Okay, all right. So one of the things I want to say first about waking up the witness is, I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Eckhart Tolle. He actually wrote a great book called The Power of Now. Another awesome book that he wrote is called The New Earth. But his major starting point of recognition was really a moment. Eckhart Tolle has multiple degrees, speaks a variety of languages. He is a brilliant brain in the world. And he's also been really gripped with anxiety and depression. If you read the introduction to The Power Now, he describes the story I'm about to tell you. But he was very suicidal at times because he overused, like many of you said you did last week, his analytical process. He was constantly processing things and struggling, effort and struggling. And so in one moment when he was really suicidal, he said out loud to himself, like, I just can't stand myself. Can't stand myself. And the new thought he had, because things can change, like just a new thought can just really, a sight from within or an insight can really change how we see things. He saw it like a banner, like I can't stand myself. And the insight he has is, well, then there must be 2 of me. The I that's struggling with the me. Right? And it's the beginning. Like when he saw it like big time, like it kind of blew his brain and the structure up, and for several days he just looked at the little dust particles in the light and was just like, whoa, I've never had that kind of a big awakening. I'm not sure that I'm not glad about that. It seems pretty intense. But this idea that there's a part of me that can notice what I'm creating, right? And so somebody later, many years later, said to me, Lisa, when you have big anxiety or when you're panicking, do you realize that there's a bigger, broader, vaster part of you that's not? And that part can kind of call you back home. So you've gotten caught up in thinking, and your thinking self is anxious, but your witness self can notice that that's happening And this is actually the part that's deeper and wiser and can bring you home. Right? My business outside of MSU is called Wisdom Heart Life. And how do you live your life day to day lined up with your deepest wisdom and your greatest sense of purpose, right? And you can't do that if you don't have a witness. I'm just noticing that shows up on the recording very loudly. Sorry, people. There's someone up there with shoes. Take your shoes to work day, apparently. Anyway, what was I saying? Wisdom, thank you. It's hard to notice if you're actually behaving in a way that's lined up with your values if your witness self isn't turned on. Right? Your thinking self, also Eckhart Tolle would call that your ego self. It gets caught up in all kinds of fear-based comparison. It's like when you're comparing and worrying about all of that perfectionism, that's your ego self. It's not your true self, right? And so just starting to know that there's two aspects of you. In the acceptance commitment theory literature, they talk about your observing self and your thinking self, right? And that too many people are living at the level of their thinking self. I'm going to draw a picture that's going to hopefully make that clearer for you. Because that's what we're really wanting to do at first is start to help you notice it. So I could ask right now, and I'm sort of curious, like if the folks out in Zoom could notice, are you actually paying? Now you might, because I'm saying, are you paying attention? Can you ask the part of you, even if you're here, because you're here, you look like you're here, but you might have been like just shopping in Myers, or you might have been thinking about your weekend or next weekend. I have no idea if you're really here. Only you can know if you're here. Are you here right now? Are you in Zoom? Are you here right now? Are you like, notice, are you attending to different details? Are you multitasking? Are you not even hearing this because you're not even actually in your chair? So the part of you that can notice if you're present is the part of you that I'm talking about. Everybody has that part. Right? When I ask people to do an emotional wellness check-in on themselves, I would be asking that witness part of you to do a quick assessment. Kind of like if I push the instrument check in my car and it would say, 92% oil life, tires are good, right? I would ask you to do that. I would say right now, could you check in with yourself? Could your witness check in with yourself and sort of say, what's up with your physical state right now? Are you hungry? Are you tired? Having a medicine reaction? I'm actually thirsty. I'll be noticing and getting a drink in a little while. Okay, so what can you notice about your physical state? Are you in a lull? Right? It's really helpful to know when that's happening. What's going on with your mood? Can you notice that? Can you just sort of, if I asked you to come up here and put your name on the mood elevator, are you in a low mood right now? Medium or high? Super glad on Friday afternoon that in a meeting with my team that somebody asked me a question and I had like an attitude, like an inner attitude, right? But I noticed that I was really tired, right? I noticed there was something going on with both my physical state and my mood that was causing me to not even what I was feeling inside and how I was sounding wasn't lined up. That was super helpful to me to notice that. What's going on with your state of mind? Is your mind really rapid and spinning and going really fast, or is it more open and unoccupied and open to new ideas? Are you analyzing right now and processing, or are you just sort of reflecting and letting it in and being curious? And also, you can also notice if you have a rule activated. Like if you can notice if you just said something intensely. You can notice if you're harsh. Right? So we really want to wake that part up because it's part of how you break free. Because that part's not an imposter. Right? I joke sometimes that I could go to a party and I could introduce myself this way. I could say, good afternoon. I'm universal energy in a human form creating. And my name happens to be Lisa. Right? Who am I really? Right? I want to just start to notice that I'm the creator of my experience. I am not the experience I'm creating. And we get really confused about that with imposter syndrome because we're creating this story that we're not competent, and then we think that that's who we are, when really that's just one of the things that we create as we go through a day creating. I'm known on campus as the jar lady. It's been a while since I took my jar out for a walk, but this is a way to think about, is this working? Is it close enough, do you think? This is a way to think about your state of mind. Like if you think of all the sand in this jar as different thoughts you might have, right now this person's having thoughts, but she's also having some clarity. She's not caught up in her thinking is sort of settled. So she can look at a project or the fact that she's public speaking or that there was an issue with the Zoom. And I responded to that, I was kind of just here. I can feel, because my witness can tell me I'm kind of here right now, right? In another moment, I might start having thoughts and then having thoughts about those thoughts. I might start getting active with those thoughts and I can start making up a story, right? And that doesn't necessarily feel good. I don't know if anybody likes when their mind's doing this, but it happens. It's all day long. I'm either clear to mud or somewhere in between. Some kids say that you could be even sparkling mind as they added value to it. I think that's great. But this happens. So when I start, I accept the task, I'm set to go on the task. When I go home to do the task, I'm creating this PowerPoint or doing anything where I'm going to step out, and then I start having thoughts about what if I don't know enough, or what if people aren't satisfied, or what if, usually it's about over-responsibility. It's like, it's my job to help these people get rid of imposter syndrome. So I might start having a lot of thoughts about that. And when this happens, what do you do with it? Right? Like we get more and more, and then we start, oh, we're not okay, and then we start giving it more attention. I want to ask you, is any amount of shaking this jar going to get it to settle back down? What needs to happen for this, right? So if you start here, if you're already here, and you start trying to reframe, or you start trying to challenge your beliefs, like from an active place like this, that's just going to make more of this. Now you're going to have a tug of war on top of shaking the jar. What has to happen, relying on the people in the room, what has to happen for this to settle down?
Just stop shaking.
I have to stop shaking it. What has to happen for that to be able to happen? What'd you say?
Stop thinking.
Stop thinking. Okay, but before that can even happen, what?
You gotta recognize that you're doing it.
Okay, I have to recognize that I'm doing it, right? I have to, and what's one more thing I need to know? It's helpful. Oh, look at me, I'm all caught up. But if I think, oh, look at me, I'm caught up because this test is really scary and the test makes me feel like this, then I'm still going to be caught up. Look, I'm starting to get tired of shaking it and it's already starting to clear, right? And you ever dragged your imposter syndrome around and you're like, sometimes you're too tired to even hold it, just whatever. I guess I'll fail. It's happened to me. It's my very first successful counseling experience. Came when I was too tired to give a crap that I might not be good enough to help these people. And then it was a great session. And the guy was like, that's what I've been looking for. I was too tired. See how fast? Like as soon as I stop giving it all my attention, it's going to settle, right? You go from here to here quite frequently. And so you have to know, the last thing you have to know is you have to know that the circumstances aren't creating the mud. Does that make sense? The circumstances aren't creating the mud. So if your witness self is not caught up, and this is now your ego brain, your ego is mud mind, and you don't see that that's happening, this is the person that's going to try to do the proposal for your dissertation. This is the one that's trying to do the lit review. What's interesting is like, you know, when I'm like this, my best thoughts don't come out, but I also I cannot hear you. I can't, right? And I can't take it in. I did my entire graduate school like this. I'm not even kidding. Both my bracelets will fit in that too. I called it was an advanced standing program for social work, and I called it the Hold Your Breath and Run Like Hell program. And so I was moving fast on the outside, but I was like this the whole time. Like, and I didn't have a witness then because nobody had helped me see this then. So I didn't get to go through that experience noticing and helping myself center. Let's talk about mindfulness. Mindfulness is when I notice that I'm all churned up. Instead of trying to change the thoughts in the jar, what I want to do is bring my attention to something in the here and now. I might have just been having a big old hairy imposter moment, and now I'm having a thought about how maybe not professional that language was, but it worked, it did. If I bring my attention to my breath, I can tell my heart's going a little fast right now. If I bring it to the sounds I can hear, I take a deep breath and let my energy fall. I want my energy to fall because I want to kind of go back to a more natural setting, right? If I bring my attention to something in the here and now, as I do that, this will naturally settle. When I look back at the situation, it's going to look different. I'm one of the pieces of clinical work that I am kind of most proud of because just how intense this person did this. A person who had already failed the bar once, and was actually going to go take the bar in Colorado, which apparently is like a really hard bar exam, as bar exams go. I don't ever want to take a bar exam personally, but so she would get caught up about time and not being smart enough fast enough. That was kind of like how it was showing up for her. And so we did this thing, which at first she was like, "You've got to be kidding me. That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard." I'm like, "Well, I'd like you to try it on." So this is why is she going to pass the bar? Probably not, right? And she knows way more. My guitar teacher once said, "Lisa, you got to go slow so you can show what you know." You know? And I was like, "Dude, that is about so much more in my life than guitar. You got to go slow so you can show what you know." Right? So she would she would start to take a question, and it would be hard, and she'd go, "Oh, I don't know if I could get this," and she just would get caught up. And so when she noticed that, I asked her to do a quick breathing reset. And as soon as she felt herself settle a little bit, she should look at the question and greet the question. Right? "Hello, question 32. What do you have for me?" That was the sentence. She had to say the sentence. She's like, "This is so silly." "Hello, question 32. What do you have for me?" And then she would read it and she'd say, "This is what I have for you." "Hello, question number 34. And she doesn't have to do it for all of them, but when she noticed that she was spinning again, so throughout the exam, she could notice and redirect back to calm and then just sort of greet the question and see, what is it that I know about this question? And it turns out she knew a lot about a lot of questions, and she passed that bar exam. I don't think she would have stayed in the room, because if you're like this and you're telling yourself that you should snap out of it, which is what we tell ourselves, we should get over it, stop thinking this way, you're in your own way, can't believe how stupid you are that you're thinking this way, you're wasting your time, stop it, stop it, stop it. It doesn't work that way, right? So waking up the witness has got to be the starting point for this conversation. Any questions in the room about that? Can you feel what I'm talking about? All right, so that's part of the starting point. Remembering who you are is that when we're all connected to innate health and well-being. It's a philosophical understanding. So some people would say, I don't know if I believe that. The analogy that I use often is that a lot like a garden hose. And then I always say that people are a lot like garden hoses, which is another reason I'm known as a weird woman on campus. But if you think of it like a hose is a vessel through which energy flows. And it comes from the spigot, and then you get to direct it wherever you think the water most needs to be. I'm just glad it's not frozen water today, that we're actually getting towards spring. But in this analogy, we humans are a vessel through which energy flows. As we're designed, when we're relaxed and open, we get full flow. Just like when the hose is relaxed and open, we have full flow. We're connected to the spigot from birth to death. We're connected to that energy flow. That nobody can take that from us. No matter what's happened to us in the past, what kind of abuse we've experienced, we're still connected to that energy. Call it whatever you want to call it. You might call it creativity. You might call it the flow. You might call it the zone. You could call it the force if you want to. Like that's what they're talking about when they talk about the force. You might have a religious or spiritual context to it that you might use. That language might be most comfortable. Doctors might talk about the biological life force, but the starting point is that we're all connected to that energy, that healthy energy, right? And nobody can take us away from that. It shows up in one of the cardinal values of social work is to honor the inherent worth and dignity of all people. And it's amazing how many social workers I know that honor the inherent worth and dignity of all people but themselves. Thank you. I'm guessing that doesn't show up on the camera very well. So, all right. This one's not very dark either. I'm gonna start her over there. That's weird. We'll be okay. Next week, note to self. I'll put slides in here that I can do it on a slide. I didn't think about that. So I know when I first started learning this, I didn't feel like I had innate health and well-being. I felt like I was messed up. I felt like I was contaminated. I edited myself that time. But I've come to see over time that I do have innate health and well-being, and that when I'm not caught up in my mind and making up a story, when I'm relaxed and at my default setting, I have good feeling, I have new ideas come to me, I am connected to that creative energy. So wanting to remember that you're a person that's connected to that flow all the time, why that's helpful is it gives you a place to come back to. My friend Millie, who I trained with for a long time, just calls this home base. And she talks about coming home. And I'll talk a little bit more about that next week. But this is one of the 3 principles. So what I learned from folks is that how people create their experience of reality moment to moment comes from the inside out. You're all creating, I'm not creating your experience right now, even though I'm a factor in your world. You're all having whatever experience you're having because of how this principle works. And so to start with this, like people think that their circumstances create their reality. So people feel like whatever they're dealing with creates their experience of reality. Most of us operate with this kind of equation. So if this is public speaking, it feels like the public speaking causes me stress. It feels like the dissertation proposal causes me stress. But really, those things are just out here doing their thing. We actually don't, our experience isn't created from outside in, it's actually created from the inside out. And this is how it works, just from the 3 principles. It's like the fastest I'm going to talk about this ever. But the circle, so you're connected to your energy. You get to have a psychological experience. Nobody can take that from you today. You are powered up and coming to me cordless right now. As long as you have that, each of these, you need all 3 of these things in order to have an experience. One is that you're connected to this innate health and well-being, this healthy source of life. Another one is that you have this gift of consciousness, which I think of as a light bulb, like I said in the movie projector, and it's illuminating. Except it doesn't just illuminate with light and pictures, it actually brings to life whatever thought you're holding, it brings it to life in your body, right? So those 2 things are sort of neutral. The third thing that we all get is thought. And so we have all these thoughts that come through, and we have to think about how many thoughts you've already had today. Like you've had a parade of thoughts. Some of those thoughts may have been imposter-oriented thoughts, but there were also a lot of other kinds of thoughts. Maybe some really creative thoughts or some brand new thoughts. A lot of the thoughts that you have are thoughts you've never had before, and some of them are thoughts that you have had before. I like to call them already thought thoughts, and they're in your memory. They're your memory-based thoughts, your already thought thoughts. They're in your thought bucket. You have a bucket of thoughts you've thought before. A lot of times, the imposter syndrome thoughts are actually hanging out. That's a dark one. Hanging out inside of there. Let's say the blue ones are the imposter thoughts. So there's a situation in here, something that you're required to do. In a moment when you're not attached to thought, this thought might be, oh, I can really do that. I'd like to take on that possibility. I'm up for it. I'll say yes. When that's not the thought that you're going for, and instead of that, this thought is the thought, this imposter thought comes in, and that's the thought that you're thinking. When your consciousness and that thought merge together, it starts to bring you an experience, right? Like Kool-Aid crystals in water. As soon as you dump the Kool-Aid crystals in there, it starts to make Kool-Aid. Similarly, the thought and your consciousness comes together, immediately starts to make an experience, which is going to bring you a physiological feeling, but also an emotion. All right, and so if the thought is a thought that's about you're not being competent, as soon as that gets attached into your consciousness, you're going to fuse with that thought, and it's going to start to bring insecurity. It's like if this thought is like a tea bag, and if your consciousness is like water, when you put that thought in there, it's going to make insecurity, right? If it's a hostile thought, you can make hostility, right? I'm just trying to play around with this because I've got about 60 seconds to finish my point here. Then you're going to go off, and I want you to notice this week. I want you to notice how when you're holding this thought, you're making this experience. When you're holding a different thought, your experience changes moment to moment according to how these principles work together, not because of the circumstance. And so when you have that experience start to happen, eventually you have more thoughts about that. Now you're caught up in kind of a thought storm, if you will. And then at some point you lead into some kind of behavior. That behavior is usually an expression of this. Like I'm going to yell at somebody, right? or it can also be a way to shut it down. And so avoidance behavior is an effort to kind of get rid of this, but you think you need to get rid of this because this thing created it, but this thing didn't actually create it, right? It's out there, this is a pressure point, it's something that's an obligation, you have a lit review to do, or you have a proposal that you have to submit, or your grant's due by 5 o'clock if you're working in the grant world. And so this avoidant behavior is designed to shut this down, but it doesn't let you, what we're really wanting you to do is actually have your wisdom be able to be in service to your circumstance that you need to do. That's what productivity looks like. Behavior leads to an outcome, which is usually more feelings of failure or upset, which we're going to hide, but it's going to populate our we're kind of not okay bucket, and then we can actually get stuck in what I call a bucket loop. That's a very clinical, fancy expression. Get stuck in a bucket loop, and we just keep going around and around in here. This is how imposter syndrome feels to me, right? It doesn't matter. Put taking a test there, put playing guitar there, put being a parent there. Doesn't matter, because this bucket is actually the bigger problem than it is the circumstances. And up here, when your thought gets driven into an emotion and physiologically comes to life, right? Like if I grab a lemon and I cut a piece of lemon and I suck on it, happens to me. Any of you have a sense of lemon just now? Maybe not, didn't maybe do that. So I'm gonna put my fingernails on chalkboard. Okay, more of you had a reaction to that. I could keep going, but I won't. Dentist drill, anybody? So okay, so that you had an expression, I'll stop. But it's true. It's true that we bring our thoughts to life through our physical senses. If we chronically go with bucket thoughts, we are chronically creating the feeling of anxiety. That's how the neurological pathways start to get created over time, where we feel like it's a have to, because we've just done it so much, our bodies know how to go there kind of quickly. But up here, when you have that thought and it creates your emotion, your ego and thinking self is kind of like how you might be up here with your feeling and your behavior, which is not lined up with your values as an academic or your values as a professional or whatever you're trying to do. We get out of sync with who we really are and what we're really trying to create because we don't understand how we operate. So if your thinking self is up here, and this is where imposter syndrome lives, right? It lives here. If your witness self is the part of you that's down here, this part can start to notice that you're caught up in a moment where you're creating a thought storm that's creating imposter feelings. Noticing that and understanding that you don't have to back it around from behavior to thinking to feeling, or from behavior to feeling to thinking, and you don't have to figure out how to get those thoughts out of your bucket. Oh my gosh, I spent so much time and money trying to get unhelpful thoughts out of my thought. I've taken the therapy and dump them out. Like, okay, we're gonna get through about a bunch of them today, right? But as soon as I start thinking about it, I'm making more of them, and I leave therapy with more thoughts. I'm more bucket activated when I leave sometimes, and that's to answer your question of why do I feel worse when I come back. So sometimes it's because we process something and we're releasing it, and sometimes it's because we just stuck our head in our bucket for 15 minutes, right? And paid a copay. That's not necessarily helpful. Understanding and being able to be looking at it from here, right? And we don't want to interrupt the behavior and have it just go back to here. We want to actually start having new ideas, because how you actually change your bucket is by having new ideas that sort of start to do it this way, right? And so we start to see that circumstance, for example, like right now, public speaking, I can tell you for sure that back in the day when I was living in my thinking self, there's no way I would have went to a concert last night and watched the Indigo Girls, had a good time with my partner. I would have not done that. Even though I had tickets, I would have bailed because I wasn't ready for today, right? And because I didn't spend all weekend doing that, I was able to get ready and feel pretty good about it, and then show up and have it be good enough. I think it's pretty. I thought it was pretty good. Like, what was say pretty good? Clap if you think it was pretty good, because they can't clap out there. No, excuse it. Maybe, sort of, not sure. My point being that living life from here helps me not spend all that time doing that, right? And so starting to wake up the witness and remembering who you were. Like, you want to start to get that who you were before you just had that thought and took it for a ride is really important. Mindfulness starts to help you clear this pathway so that your value guided self can reset. like actually, I think I said it in the self-compassion class, got confused. There was a guy who said he was gonna get up in the morning and do a bunch of work, and then ended up getting up at 11, and was so upset with himself for getting up at 11 that he spent all day in a thought spin. And like, what time did you go to bed? Like 11 or 12. I'm like, that's like 12 hours or 13 hours where you actually could have reset and done some work, except that you spent that in there, right? He didn't see that. He just spent all day in there thinking he had to because he got up late, when really he could have remembered who he was, let himself let go of that, and then recalibrate. Not knowing who you are, not being connected to your values in that way, would be like having a GPS for your car but never putting any coordinates in it, right? And so we're going to get off track in a moment, we're going to get caught up in thought, but if we see it and release it, we can actually do something different. So I think I have to stop there because I'm already over. Lady's like, yes, you're already over. So if people, like, they already left it, they left, but I will be putting these out again. I'll send it out to you again, so if anybody needs to leave before I finish, that's cool. You'll still be able to get it from there. So I'm not even going to look at what I didn't get to. We're going to leave it there.
Can I just say, so if you're in the room and this is your first week being here, if you can just sign in on this piece of paper so we can make sure you get the slides and everything. And I also want to just say that there are some jazz hands happening on
cool.
Zoom instead of a clap. So.
Yay.
And then folks want to make an insecurity and a whole T line.
Oh, good. Good. Yeah, your job this week is just to start to notice yourself, and please don't notice and then get into a bunch of judgment. You just get points for noticing. That you get caught up sometimes. When you're caught up and you're really just, what you're wanting to do is just bring your attention to the present moment and try to breathe. We're just looking to sort of let it settle in the moment, and then you can restart again from there. We'll be back next Monday to say a few more things to y'all. What'd you say? Oh, yeah. That'd be really great if I did that.
You're so good too. Haven't you been kind of like this?